Good evening. Those of you who have not been with us in this work before may not quite realize the meaning of our meditations. Sometimes before the work, always before the work, but sometimes in the middle of the work, sometimes after the work. And so I would like you to know that the greatest power I have ever discovered in life is the power of meditation. The power of meditation works on every level of human life. As an individual, when I meditate, I am acknowledging by the mere act of meditating that there is a something greater than I. And because I'm meditating within, I'm also acknowledging that that something greater than I is within me. He that is within me is greater than he that is in the world. The Father within me, he doeth the works. And so the very moment, and by the act of closing my eyes or turning within, I am in that instant relaxing my personal selfhood, my personal wisdom, my personal strength, my personal knowledge, and acknowledging that I can and would like to now receive something from within, some assurance of God's grace, some assurance of God's presence, because thy grace is my sufficiency in all things. Now, when we meditate collectively together, it is as if all of us acknowledged that in this room, here with us, there is a divine presence, and that we are now opening ourselves to its influence, to its grace, to its power. It is just as if we were saying that we are not in this room to hear a man. We are in this room to receive spiritual light, and that we are to receive it from the source of light. In my early years in practice, I had the opportunity of working with a school teacher and proving through her that it is totally unnecessary for children to be sick during the school year, during the winter months. Also, it is totally unnecessary for any child to fail to pass its examinations at any time in the year or at the year's end. Because of this discovery, this particular school teacher became the very top of the educational system in her state, from just a primary classroom teacher. Now, today we are having a further opportunity of proving what this can do, because we have 3 school teachers at the very present time who have introduced the subject of meditation into their classroom. Not in a religious sense so as to violate any laws about religion and education, merely in the sense of let us be quiet a moment. Let us be still a moment. And then the teacher and the children learn to be still for just a minute or two. And this is now done twice a day, the morning session and the afternoon session. And not only are those children showing forth better work, but whereas there were some disobedient children, let us just call them that, this has all been eliminated from the classroom. Not by moralizing, merely by meditating. Because when we meditate and acknowledge a divine presence, that divine presence that is there takes over. And it affects us. It makes us every whit whole, not only in our conduct, in our health, in all things that pertain to us. In the same way, businessmen are finding the importance of meditating, not only for themselves, but recently one of our columnists, newspaper columnists in the States, who has a column that runs in newspapers all across the United States, wrote an article on the subject of meditation and explained how many people are coming into her awareness who now meditate during their business day, during their professional day. Whatever they may be doing, some period of the day is devoted to a meditation. It was, of course, a fortuitous circumstance that she mentioned that The Art of Meditation is the finest book on that subject that she knows. But that was merely incidental to the fact that she was presenting to readers all across the United States the subject of meditation and its importance. I think it was last year that the Reader's Digest carried a couple of articles on the subject of meditation. So it is then that in my life, and through me in the lives of those of our students who will listen to me, meditation plays an important part, if not the most important part, of our daily lives. Because in a period of meditation, we are dying to ourselves in the sense that we are denying ourselves. And we are acknowledging a spiritual influence, a spiritual substance or law or activity, and by virtue of our meditation, we give it the opportunity to take over in our experience. And so it is that as you continue your study, you will find that the two most important foundational points are practicing the presence and then meditation. We have a question here I do not fully understand. How would you justify casting thy bread on the waters and its results with a life lived by grace in which no return is sought for the good expressed? I don't believe I understand that question, and if you will ask it again, rephrase it, I may be able to do better with it. Unless you mean that there should be some looking for a return for the good that is expressed. If you mean that, that is not correct. It is not necessary to look for any return. It is necessary only to live as a transparency through which God can perform God's functions. And then somehow the individual is taken care of in some way that meets the particular need. But if it has a different meaning, please write it again. Would you explain why the birth of Jesus has been told to us as a virgin birth when such a thing is against our social law? Well, first of all, let's forget about the social law, because in spiritual things you're not quite so much concerned with the law as would otherwise be the case. As a matter of fact, all spiritual truth has had to be given to the world by a violation of law. The law would always prevent the presentation of spiritual truth if it could. Just as recently as these last 10 years, there have been rules in many countries that, if we'd listened to, would have forbade our giving these talks. There have been definite laws on the books that would have prevented anyone giving money to anyone coming to their country to give such a talk. Positive laws about that, and other rules as well. And so it is that truth is usually against the law in that way until such time as the individuals who write the laws begin to discern its nature. I can take you back, of course, to the time when there was little or no freedom to practice one's religious beliefs. The Pilgrims who went from England and Holland and founded the American colonies did not go there for the purpose of religious freedom, but to prevent religious freedom. Both England and Holland had become so liberalized that they were permitting freedom of religious worship. And the Pilgrims couldn't tolerate that, because they wanted no religion but their own. And they wanted to be in a place where there would be no religion but their own. And so they migrated by means of the Mayflower and the other early ships to the American continent, and there set up their own religious worship, forbidding anyone else the right to do the same. And then when Williams set up or attempted to set up another religion, he was expelled from the colony and was forced to go south to Providence, Rhode Island, and found another colony where he could practice his particular religious belief. And so it is that, today in Spain, if you were to be found with an Infinite Way book in Spain today, you would be given your choice. Surrender it or leave the country. In Spain, there is no permission to practice any form of religious worship except Catholicism. And there are other places on the globe as well. So that all introduction of truth in its beginning necessitates a violation of the law. Jesus, of course, violated the law. That's why he was crucified. If he'd been in obedience to the law, he couldn't have been crucified. But he was disobeying the law of his church and of Rome. Now, aside from that, why has the birth of Jesus been told to us as a virgin birth? And I'm happy indeed to explain this to you. Everything that has existence, everything that man has made, symbolizes something. represents something. And it has, for those who have made it, or those who have learned about it, a meaning. For instance, we have in Christianity the crucifix. Now the crucifix in and of itself is nothing. A piece of metal hung around the neck is nothing. But everyone who looks, every Christian who looks upon a crucifix instantly knows that this symbolizes the way of the cross, which is the way of dying daily to one's human self, exterminating the human selfhood, that one may be born again. It is a constant reminder that if you are not denying yourself, if you are not crucifying your human selfhood, there is no opportunity of your spiritual selfhood being born and revealed. And so to the Christian, the crucifix is a symbol of that. In the same way, then, every statue, every figure in every religion symbolizes something that brings to light a living example or living moral or living teaching or living principle in the mind of those who know it. Recently I wrote, and you will soon be reading this, that there are many we have seen in the Orient who make trips into and through these temples and shrines, and they see the many figures there, the many statues, the many forms, and immediately smile at this paganism and inwardly believe that actually all of this does represent paganism, forgetting, of course, that as soon as they get home they will go into their own churches and see more statues and more figures and more paintings and more stained glass windows, and that if the nature of those isn't understood, it is but the same paganism that they have been seeing in the Orient. But as a matter of fact, neither of these represents paganism. Neither of them. Behind the statues and figures of the Orient and behind the statues and figures of the Occident, each one represents a lesson. Each one represents a teaching. Each one represents a principle that those who know are supposed to remind themselves of by virtue of this, and to bear in mind as a lesson that will help them shed themselves of their humanhood and enable them to bring forth their spiritual nature. Now, yes, I have this one quickly in mind. You will notice in the Orient, before temples and shrines, and even before many homes, a gate, a gateway, tall this way, and it is down at the bottom of the road. The moment you pass through it, you're on the grounds of that home or that temple or shrine. The reason for this is this. That gate is to remind you to leave outside all of your dirt, all of your mental garbage. When you walk through that gate, remember, you are on holy ground. you are entering a temple, a shrine, or a home. And a home in the Orient is very sacred. That is why they take off their shoes, not merely to shed physical dirt or mud, but as a symbol of shedding their uncleanness before they enter that home. And so it is, you see, that everything has a significance if you understand the story behind the visible effect. And so it is that all spiritual teaching is taught by symbols, by allegories, by parables. And the story of the virgin birth goes back thousands of years before the Master. As a matter of fact, there have been 7 spiritual leaders credited with having been born of a virgin. Jesus is not only not the first, he's the 7th and the last. Before him there were 6 others. One that I bring quickly to mind for you is that of Gautama the Buddha. Those of you who are familiar with the story will know that this great king married a virgin, but recognized that her virginity was of such a nature that she was to bring forth for the world its Savior. And he knew her not. And in due time, the heavens lit up, and the sun and the moon and the stars trembled, and the great music was heard in the air, and she conceived. And then in due time she brought forth this baby, Gautama the Buddha, and she was still a virgin. Upon his birth, the holy men of India went to that palace to see this babe. And one man, the old sage and seer, made his acknowledgments before the babe and then said, I have lived only for this hour that I might see and recognize this babe, and then he was ready to go. All of which you will notice is repeated 500 years later in the story of the virgin birth of Jesus and the holy men that went there and the aged sage who acknowledged him. The significance always is the Christ is a virgin birth because it comes to you by no human or physical process. It is a grace of God that enters your consciousness. When it enters your consciousness, it enters as a babe. That is, you're almost afraid to acknowledge that you had a spiritual experience. You're quite afraid you may have deceived yourself. It is of such a fleeting moment that you are not even certain that you're not fooling yourself in remembering it. It is such a gentle experience that you can't be certain if it ever happened. And yet, as you ponder, as you continue to think, as you continue to meditate, this babe that was conceived in you continues to unfold, continues to let you become aware of its presence, but always in such a way that you're not quite positive of it or not quite sure. At least you're not strong in it. And then comes the birth. When the birth takes place, it comes with an experience that makes you know beyond all doubt that the Christ has touched you because of its very visible effect, very tangible effect. It may change the whole nature of your life. It may change the whole nature of your character. It may change the whole nature of your whole infinite experience or immortal experience. When this birth takes place, the world tries to kill it for you. The world doesn't want you to have this that it hasn't got, this glorious thing, and it begins immediately to tell you how wrong you are and how you're deluding yourself, and you may even be insane for all we know. And years ago, people who had religious experiences were declared insane. The ignorance on the subject was so tremendous. But if you are wise, once you are aware that the Christ has been born in your experience, and that never again will you be called upon to live your own life. I live, yet not I. Now Christ liveth my life. You will be wise if instead of telling it to others or showing it to others or trying to prove it to others, that you take it down into Egypt. Egypt, the place of darkness. Keep it hidden. Let the Christ in your experience be revealed only by its effects in your life, not by your voicing it, not by your telling it, not by your trying to convince someone, because you can't. You can't. You might as well try to convince a person born blind of sunshine. You can't. You have no way of doing it. They have no way of receiving it. They are not living on that level of consciousness. You might as well try to convince someone that there is a way to live by grace without worry, without fear, without accident, without death, without poverty. You cannot tell this to a person who has not attained the consciousness able to recognize it. And so you are wise if you carry your babe down to Egypt, hide it, tell no one about it, and let them see it only by its effect until you yourself are so strengthened in it that you arrive at that place of conviction where, if necessary, you would go to jail for it, or you would allow yourself to be thrown in a den of lions for it, or crucified for it. On this point, I have explained such a situation that took place in the very earliest days of the Christian Science movement. There was a woman who, in her first class with Mrs. Eddy, was so deeply touched that she experienced the Christ, and she became a very great healer. And in her city, she did wonderful healing works, so much so that it aroused the antagonism of some people in places of authority. And so one day, a child whom she had been called upon to help passed on, and she was immediately arrested, put in jail to await trial. And her students, hearing of it very quickly, went down to the jail and paid her fine, or bail rather, went down to the jail and put up bail for her so that she could get out. She went home, but within a very short time she was arrested again. And this time, when her students came, she said, oh no, not again. That was a human way of doing things, to put up my bail, and you see, it is of no avail. And if you put up Baal now, it won't help. Even if it helps me, there will be others later. But if I can work this out spiritually, it will never happen to me again and may never happen to others. And so they permitted her to stay in jail until she did receive her release spiritually, without imprisonment, without fine, and by being discharged. But the great wonderful thing that happened is this, that never again in that city was a Christian Scientist ever arrested. That is, for practicing Christian Science. Now, so it is that when this Christ takes over in your experience and begins to produce fruitage for you, the world which doesn't understand, the world which can't believe, will do its best to ruin, to take from you this Christ, or the fruitage of it, or destroy you in the attempt. But if you are grounded, if you have actually come to a place of demonstration where you know that there is no power ever to overthrow the Christ, there is no power on earth ever that can undo the work of God, when you have attained that place of conviction, then you no longer resort to human means. You now have the full and complete Christ, and it becomes your way. But do you not see that this Christ cannot come to you by means of parentage? It cannot come to you by inheritance. It cannot come to you by someone's gift. It is a virgin experience that takes place within you without any material accompaniment. It is one of divine grace itself, which cannot be explained on any other basis. And so it is then that for several thousand years before the time of the Master, this was known, and so every religious teaching was ushered in, every major religious teaching was ushered in with the virgin birth. And because it meant the virgin birth of the teaching, it eventually became identified with the virgin birth of the teacher, the original revelator. But it was always meant to be symbolic. And it was only in the Christian experience that it was taken to be as a completely literal experience. If God created us in His own image, what is the reason for this human mortal experience? Well, there isn't any reason for it at all. It has no reason, and it has no right to exist. But it exists by virtue, and it is sustained by virtue of the universal belief in two powers. As long as there is a vestige of belief in you or me that there are two powers, in that degree are we human, mortal. In other words, our divinity is made manifest only in the degree that we can embody the realization of one power. And the reason is this: there is actually only one power, and God is that power. There are no other powers. And we can be very positive in stating this and in presenting it. Very often I hear from truth teachers, or those who introduce me sometimes at lectures, that they are amazed at my positiveness absolute positiveness that brooks no argument. Well, of course, the answer to that is simple. I've been in the metaphysical healing work for 30 years. And this has given me the opportunity to know that there can be only one power, for if there were two powers, how would we ever have healed metaphysically? What would do the healing if there are two powers? Now, when you have sat by the side of a person with a fever, pneumonia, or any of the so-called serious or deadly diseases, and when you have witnessed their dissolution, not by might, not by power, because you brought no might to it and you brought no power to it. You had nothing with you to reduce the fever. You had nothing with you to remove the rheumatism germ or the arthritis germ. You had no power whatsoever to bring to those conditions, and yet you witness them dissolve and disappear. Is there any more proof necessary that these conditions are not power, and that they only continue their destructive course until they hit up against the consciousness of an individual who knows that these aren't power? God is infinite power. Let us take, for instance, the healing mission of Jesus Christ. Perhaps you are not aware that he never used a power to heal disease, not even a God power, that he didn't even call on God, that he didn't even pray to God. To a crippled man, he says, "What did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk." Think of that. What did hinder you to a crippled man? The crippled man could have said, "I'm paralyzed." He couldn't answer anything in the face of such a statement. What did hinder you? In other words, there's only God. To a blind man, open your eyes. No praying to God, no using a God power, just open your eyes. What authority has he for saying, open your eyes? He has the conviction of God's omnipotence, meaning that blindness cannot have a power. In the other case of blindness, he proved it by taking some spittle and applying it to the eye. He wasn't giving us a formula for healing blindness. He didn't recommend to his disciples later that they should heal blindness with spittle. No. He used spittle as an object of disdain. Even this nothing can heal blindness. Why? Because blindness isn't a power. In every case, you will notice he did not turn to God. I say unto thee, maid, arise. Lazarus, come forth. Every healing of the Master is an indication that he had the inner conviction that God is power, but God is infinite power. God is not a power to heal disease. God is the only power there is, therefore disease has no power. Or sin. And certainly in proving supply, he proved that lack has no power, that there is no such thing as a law of lack. And so we find that which is the absolute basis of the infinite way healing work, and that which we have witnessed, not only in my experience, but we have other practitioners who are proving it every single day, that ye need not fight, ye need not battle error, ye need not try to overcome it or destroy it. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. Let there be light, for there is but one power. God is the only power. Now, no one, to our knowledge, has attained the full and complete demonstration of that awareness, but every one of us has demonstrated it in some measure. Everyone on the spiritual path, everyone on the metaphysical path, has at some time or other demonstrated the absolute nothingness of those things that the world claims to be dangerous, destructive, harmful. So it is then that we know, as we were told in Scripture, that Adam and Eve would still be in Eden if it weren't that they accepted the belief in two powers, good and evil. But for their acceptance of good and evil, they would still be in Eden where there is only one power, good. And no opposite, no opposition. So then, while, from all that I know, it is impossible to say how, where, or when this universal belief in two powers came into experience, we do know this, that symbolically or as a parable, it is told in the story of Adam and Eve. They were absolutely pure. They were living completely in harmony, complete and perfect harmony in every detail of their lives until they accepted two powers. And the moment they accepted two powers, they found themselves expelled from the Garden of Eden, where they had to struggle for a livelihood and bring forth children in pain and all the rest of these things. Now, in shall I say, a partial measure, you have an acknowledgement of this today in this experience that began some years ago with a doctor in England who discovered the method of painless childbirth, and all that this method consists of is having the expectant mother visit him at certain periods until the birth of the child, so that he can assure her and reassure her that birth is a natural process. Birth is something natural and is really a part of woman's life. And because it is natural and a natural process, there is no element of pain in it, no element of destruction. And over these months, he awakens her confidence in the normalcy of childbirth, the naturalness of childbirth, until when it does take place, she's so completely relaxed that there is a painless childbirth. And in this work of this doctor and those who now carry it on, it is proven that where there is pain in childbirth, it is nothing but the mother's fear of pain that causes a contraction of the muscles of the body. And naturally, under those circumstances, there is bound to be pain if you are resisting the passage of that child. But when there is a complete relaxedness, a complete confidence in the naturalness of the process, the normalcy of the process, then there follows no pain. This, in a tiny measure, is meant to show you that there are not two powers at a childbirth, the birth and something to cause pain. There's really only one power. The other one is artificially brought into the picture through ignorance. Now, actually, there is quite a difference in the spiritual side, because there is a spiritual state of consciousness, a spiritual unfoldment, in which you receive an inner assurance of this my presence. My presence. The moment you have an awareness of my presence, there is nothing left out here to fear. There is the conviction that this presence always goes before you to make the crooked places straight. There is an inner conviction, an assurance that no circumstance can arise that is detrimental to this presence or its activities. Those of you who have heard the 1959 and 1960 tapes will recall how many times I have said that I am changing the marriage ceremony. We will not any longer have that which God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. That is now obsolete. That which God hath joined together, no man can put asunder. Can you for a moment believe that what God hath joined together, man can disrupt or destroy? Unfortunately, that won't keep all marriages intact, but that's only because all marriages weren't made in heaven. Those that are man-made will still be subject to being broken up. Those that were made for some good human reason. But those that are of divine origin can never be broken up. And that refers not only to the institution of marriage, but to the great marriage. Remember that all mystical literature brings the mystical experience forward in the form of marriage. Marriage is the name and experience that is given to mysticism, to the mystical life. Why? Because there is a period of our lives, the purely human one, in which I am a human, a being, something separate and apart by itself. And at that same time, there is no denying that there is a spiritual being, which we may call God. But when the moment of the mystical experience takes place, the two become one. That which was human and that which was divine meet, and the human is dissolved, and all that is left is the divine. And in this coming together in oneness, where there's no longer two, there is only one, this is called the mystical marriage. You find this in the Song of Solomon. But you find it in a great deal of mystical literature. The union with God, conscious oneness with God. And in mystical language it is called the marriage. The divine marriage, the spiritual marriage, in which two become one. I and my Father are one is the consummation of the marriage. I and my Father are one. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for there's no longer two here, there is only one. It is no longer Jesus bar Jonah, Bar Joseph. It is no longer Jesus, son of Joseph. It is now Jesus the Christ, or Jesus the Christed one. In other words, it is now Jesus the Son of God. And so it is that, and that is why, too, in many spiritual teachings, the disciple changes their name at a certain point in their history, just as Jesus changed the name of Simon and gave him the name Simon from whatever it had been before, Simon Peter. And so with others. And there are spiritual teachings today where when you reach a certain point in your development, the teacher gives you a new name and you drop the name you have carried throughout your life. And the reason is, this symbolizes the fact that you have died to your humanhood. You have died to your past history. You have died to your mother and your father and your sister and your brother, and you have now been reborn of the Spirit. Now, to everyone who comes into the mystical experience, this changing of name takes place, this changing of character, this changing of identity, even though it may not be outwardly expressed. In other words, those to whom it happens may not tell the rest of the world about it, but it has happened and they know it. In the same way that the bestowing of the robe is a mystical experience, and everyone who has had the experience of mysticism has felt that robe descend upon them. Of course they never refer to it. Of course it is only their inner spiritual experience. It is not an outer robe. It is not something to be worn over the shoulders. It is something to be spiritually worn as a garment which one places around themselves so as to keep forever from view whatever is left of human sense in one's consciousness. And when this takes place, it brings with it that which the Master revealed in these passages. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I will be with thee unto the end of the world. I am thy bread and thy meat, thy wine and thy water. With this mystical experience, with this coming into conscious oneness with God, there comes an inner feeling or assurance within that there is a presence, and it brings that assurance, never fear again, for nothing will come nigh thy dwelling place. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, and therefore nothing shall ever disturb thee. You shall be able to say with Paul, none of these things of the outer world move me. None of these things move me. For I and the Father are one, and I have that divine presence within. And then you are living the life of Paul. I live, yet not I. This presence lives my life. Well, you will see as we go further that the entire spiritual experience is going to depend on your ability to achieve two principles in your consciousness, which first of all you may only be able to accept intellectually, and then which, if you tabernacle with these two principles, will appear to you as the birth of the Christ, as the Annunciation first, and then the birth of the Christ, and then the experience of being lived by it, with it, and through it. Yes, let us stop for a little while and relax, and then we will continue for another hour.